Tonight we are going to be talking about, first of all, tonight's class is in the memory of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef. His neshama should have an elevation. Tonight we are going to be talking about the Beit HaMikdash, but that's not what we're going to really talk about. That's what we're going to pretend to talk about. Really, we're going to talk about the mourning of the Beit HaMikdash. But even that's not really what we're going to talk about. What we're really going to talk about is why are we today still mourning something that happened 2,000 years ago? We didn't do it. We did it. What? So Bruce says because it's our heritage. Okay, that's a good answer. If you're online, go ahead and chat. I have both chats in front of me. Why do you think, we're jumping ahead, we just went out of order of the class, but it's fine. Why do you think, we'll get back to this question, but why do you think that today, or not today, this week, today, the whole 9-day period, starting from really the beginning of the 3 weeks and the walls of Jerusalem were breached, is a time of mourning for the Jewish people. This week, Wednesday night, is Tisha B'Av, and we're going to come to the synagogue, 8:45 is services, we're going to sit on the floor, and the room will be dark. We're going to we'll sit on maybe some chairs upside down, and we're going to read the book of Lamentation. We're going to read a book that's very, very harsh and very, very sad, describing the suffering and the destruction that the Jewish people had to deal with, describing how the siege of Jerusalem was so bad, the hunger was so bad, the mothers were eating their children, how the Jews... Yeah, very harsh. How there were so many Jews that were sold as slaves when the Romans invaded Jerusalem that the price of the slaves fell to almost nothing. People didn't want to buy slaves. There were so many Jewish slaves on the slave market. Many harsh verses describing how Jerusalem went from being the crown jewel to being a deserted, desolate, empty, barren wasteland where no one goes, how the princess has fallen. Very, very, I'm not getting a class in Eicha now, so I'm about to get myself way off. Wednesday night, you'll come, you'll read the book of Lamentations, it's very sad. And then Thursday, we fast, starting from Wednesday night, from 8:11 here in Coral Springs. You have to look at your own time if you're online. Here in Coral Springs, starting 8:11 is the fast. We don't eat, we don't drink, we don't have any creams or ointments or lotions or any kind of makeup. We don't have any intimacy with our spouse. And we don't wear leather shoes. No clothes the whole 9 days. But it's the point is we're in a state of mourning. And the truth is, this I was going to say, all of the laws of mourning, all the laws of Tisha B'Av are built on the laws of mourning. So if you're familiar with the laws of Avelut, of mourning, when a person sadly loses a parent, a spouse, and they have to sit Shiva, and they have to mourn for 7 days, what does a mourner do? They sit on the ground in a state of mourning, and they don't wear clean clothing. They wear the same torn shirt, and they're not allowed to learn Torah. Learning Torah is something which gives you pleasure. Torah is the light of God in the world. Learning Torah is something that makes us happy and gives us joy. So a mourner, besides for the laws of mourning that they need to know in order to do the right thing according to Jewish law, a mourner is not allowed to learn any Torah during the week of Shiva. And on Tisha B'Av, it's forbidden for us to learn, except for laws of Tisha B'Av or laws about the Beit HaMikdash. We allowed to read the Gemara about the destruction of the temple, etc. The Book of Lamentations, obviously, but otherwise we don't learn on Tisha B'Av. It's a time of sadness, so we're fasting. But many of the other laws of the sitting on the floor, of the darkness, of not greeting people, we don't greet people on Tisha B'Av. These are all laws that are taken straight from a mourner who's sitting in Avelut, who's sitting in mourning over the destruction, over the sadness, over the loss of their temple. And so we understand when a person, God forbid, loses a relative, they lose a parent, God forbid, they lose a spouse, God forbid. They're sitting on the floor and they're mourning and they're heartbroken and they're crying and they're not enjoying good food or drinking. Why? Okay, so you go from a low to a high. Is that what you're saying?
In reflection and so isn't like next month when we're reflecting and
the month of Elul is a month of reflection and of self-fixing our lives and all that. Yes. Okay, so let's go through. So that's a question we really need to address tonight to understand why is the mourning. Obviously it's sad the temple was destroyed. We get that it's sad. We get that it's a national loss. But we've suffered many national losses. We've gone through every nation, every culture, every country has lost monuments, has lost buildings, has lost wars. Even the Jewish people have had other moments of sadness in our history. We don't mourn them with the same kind of intensity 2,000 years later. Nothing is comparable to it. So the question is why? Okay, very good. So let's first go through the history, just clarify, what are we mourning? Because people, we're mourning the destruction of the temple. What was the temple? What was the temple? So to clarify, the Beis HaMikdash, we had two temples. The first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in the year 423 BCE. Okay, that was the first temple destroyed by the Babylonians. The Jews went into exile. This is the story of Purim. Just to give you some historical context, the story of Purim takes place when the Jews are in Persia, which was after the Babylonians were then conquered by the Persians, by the Medes, and then the Persians. So the Jews are in exile, and eventually Ezra the scribe brings the Jews back into the land of Israel. Not all the Jews went, but some of the Jews went back with Ezra the scribe, and eventually the son of Achashverosh and Esther, Darius the Mede, or Daryavesh in Hebrew, gives permission for the second temple to be rebuilt. Second temple is rebuilt in Israel. The last 410 years. And then in the year 70 CE, or before that, Herod rebuilt the temple. It was a temple. When the Jews came back from exile with Ezra the scribe, they were very, very poor. And they had no money to build a beautiful sanctuary. So it was built out of wood, just plain wood, and was very, very bare and plain. And it says when the Jews were inaugurating the new temple, the older Jews that remembered the first temple of glory, of gold and marble, were crying and celebrating at the same time. Like they were happy the temple was standing again. But this is what we have compared to what was. It was a big distance. But eventually it was upgraded, and then King Herod, it's a very interesting story, but not for tonight. King Herod ended up killing King Herod ended up killing a lot of the sages, and as an atonement, so to say, he ended up totally renovating the Beis HaMikdash, making one of the most beautiful buildings you can imagine. The Talmud tells us that he who did not see the beautiful temple that Herod built did not see a beautiful building in their life. If you want to imagine what was the ultimate of beauty, the temple of Herod, that was the most magnificent building that you can imagine. If you didn't see that, you didn't see beauty. So I appreciate all the answers on Facebook about the closeness with our Creator that existed 2,000 years ago. Beautiful thing. We're going to go back to them. So the temple was not only a beautiful building. The temple was also the place where God was revealed, and therefore where we could feel a closeness and a connection to God. I discussed this on the weekly email I wrote on Friday, but it's a very important point. What makes a place holy? When you can feel the presence of God in that place. So Jews living all over the world, then they weren't as scattered as today, obviously, all over Israel, wanted to feel a spiritual connection. What did they do? They came to the temple, and when they came to the temple, they felt the holiness of God. God was palpable in the temple. The Kohanim were singing, and the Levites were singing, and there was the offerings, and there was the whole aura, the whole energy of Jerusalem, the whole excitement of being there. They felt the presence of God. And therefore, a large number of mitzvot that the Jewish people observed were directly related to and dependent upon having a Beis HaMikdash. Guys, are you ready for this? We have how many mitzvahs in the Torah? 613. How many of the 613 commandments can only be done in the temple? A lot is a pretty safe answer because you can't be wrong with that number. 200 and something, a little closer than a lot. 200 and something, that's yeah. What? No, 248 is positive commandments. Yeah. So out of the 613 commandments that a Jew is doing his whole life anywhere in the world, 180 of them cannot be done outside the temple. 180 out of 613. That's a lot of commandments. I'll let you do the fraction, figure out what that ratio is. What? No, it can only be done in the temple. Without a temple, we can't bring Bikurim. Without a temple, we can't bring the offerings. Without Bikurim, without the temple, there's so many mitzvot that were connected to the temple. It was a major part of the identity of the Jewish people, a place where God's presence was felt, was sensed, a place where Jews felt connected to God, and their God was real to every single person. In addition to that, the temple was also the place of our pride. The whole world knew about the beautiful temple. Starting from the times of Shlomo HaMelech, it says that all the nations, King David fought many wars and conquered many lands. When Shlomo HaMelech, when King Solomon built the temple, he built the Beit HaMikdash, people from all over the world came to see, to understand who was this nation, and came to worship God, and came close to God through the beauty and the magnificence and the impact of the Beit HaMikdash had on them. And this was through all the generations. In fact, when King Herod renovated the whole Beit HaMikdash, the whole temple, he actually enlarged Temple Mount and created a large viewing area where non-Jewish visitors who were obviously not in a state of ritual purity to walk into the temple and could stand on like bleachers and see everything happening inside the temple without actually walking into the biblical Temple Mount. It's called whatever. If you go like where the Kotel is today is under that area actually, meaning the actual temple itself is further. When you go in the temple tunnels, and then the tunnel tours, you go and you come to the place where the Kodesh Kadashim was. You're walking west. You're walking north. This is on the south end of Temple Mount, is where he built a whole extension where there was a place for non-Jews to come, to visit, to watch, to be inspired by what was taking place inside the temple. So let's understand. The Beis HaMikdash, number one, a place of spiritual connection for a Jew. It was a place where a Jew could feel an immediate, palpable sense of connection to God. Number two, the Beit HaMikdash was a place of Jewish pride, a place where God was visible to the whole world. It says about the Beit HaMikdash was a house of prayer for all the nations. All the nations could come and call out there to God. It was a place that became literally light that from there shined out to the whole world. The ideas of God, of monotheism, of an invisible God, of not worshiping idols. The Beit HaMikdash was our center, and it became a source for the entire world, a source of Jewish pride to the whole world. Yes. Okay. So now we can begin to appreciate a little bit what was lost when the temple was destroyed. Two things happened to the Jewish people when the temple was destroyed. Number one is we lost this easily accessible place where we could feel the presence of God in an easy way. To be able to just walk into the temple, you bring your offering, you bring your first fruits, you bring your tithe, and you come in, and to feel the holiness that existed in the sanctity of the walls of the Beit HaMikdash. And I was going to talk a little bit the different walls, the rooms, but you walked into the courtyard, the Azara, and there were the 15 steps going up to the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And on those 15 steps, you had the Levites singing the songs and the melodies and the beauty. You immediately just felt carried away into a state of holiness. That sense of connection to God, where we saw the miracles, there were multiple miracles that happened on a daily basis in the temple. Cloud of fire on the altar that went straight up. The wind couldn't move the cloud of fire. Rain wouldn't put out the fire. Many miracles. There were no flies, no mosquitoes. There'd be room for everyone to bow down. Thousands of people would fit into the courtyard. There'd be room for everybody. Many miracles took place. That physical place where we felt the sense of connection to God was gone. In addition, our pride as a nation, not only our central location where the Jews gathered together, where we had a court, the Sanhedrin, the men of the Great Assembly sat and held court in the Beit HaMikdash. That was where the court was. Not only did we lose our central authority in the Sanhedrin, the great court, we lost our pride. We lost our ability to shine to the nation and show this is who we are. This is our place. This is our temple. So we can understand that the loss of the Jewish people when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed by the Romans was tremendous. It was a tremendous loss on a spiritual level, and it was a tremendous loss on a national level, on the ability for us to be inspired, and it was a loss for us to inspire others. Got it? Okay. So now that we've said that, the question still remains. It's indeed a sad day. It's indeed a big loss for our nation to no longer have a Beit HaMikdash. It's indeed a loss for us to no longer have a place to feel that immediate connection. But why are we mourning that we're sitting on the floor like mourners? That we're fasting in grief? That we're wearing torn clothes, not torn, but we're wearing, not new clothing, not fresh clothing, and we're sitting not shaved, not bathed, not showered, not sitting like mourners on the floor. Why? So, there's some very beautiful ideas I want to share with you tonight. I'm going to start by reading to you, for those that are watching on my personal page anyway, a verse from Yecheskel. Okay? This verse from Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a prophet that unfortunately had to deal with tremendous sadness. He was forced to prophesy about the destruction of the temple, etc. He was not so popular, unfortunately. And here in chapter 11 is a dialogue between Yecheskel or Ezekiel and God. Okay? Ezekiel says to God in chapter 11, verse 13, "It came to pass, as I was prophesying that Paltiyahu ben Beniah died, and I fell on my face." At this time, when one of the leaders of the Jewish people died, and the Jews were being scattered in exile, I fell on my face, and I cried out with a loud voice, and I said, "Alas, O Lord God, are you making a complete end to the remnant of Israel? The last of our leaders are being killed and being destroyed, and the Jews are being scattered in exile. You're obliterating us. You're destroying us." And Yecheskel says to God, "Oh God, kala ata oiseh." Kala means like finito, completion, obliterate. Are you making a total end to the Jewish people? So God responds to him, and then God says, and this follows in verse 16. "Therefore," says God, so said the Lord God, although I have removed them far off among the nations, and although I have scattered them in the lands, nevertheless, I have become for them a minor sanctuary in the lands where they have come." So God says to them, in the Hebrew, even though I have scattered them all over, and indeed the Jews are flung across the world, I have become for them a mikdash ma'at, which means a small mikdash, a small sanctuary. I'm reading the words of Yecheskel. A small sanctuary in the lands where they have come. This is what Yecheskel says in the prophecy. So the Talmud in Megillah says as follows, quoting this verse, "V'ehi lehem l'mikdash ma'at," I have become for them. It says in the verse that you have been to them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they have come. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, this mikdash ma'at, this is referring to the synagogues and the study halls in Babylonia. This is referring to the Beis Medrashes and the Beit Knesset. You have a place of prayer. You have a place where the Jews come to gather together to pray, a place where they gather to learn. This becomes the miniature mikdash, the miniature sanctuary that is still where God says, "I am found over there." So this is our mikdash. That's correct. This place right here where we find ourselves now, this is our mikdash.
So we don't call them temples. We don't call them,
No, Marsha is right. We don't call it a temple. We call it a sanctuary. We call it a synagogue. We actually deliberately don't call it a temple because the temple was the temple that I'm talking about tonight, the temple that stood on Temple Mount, on Har HaBayit in Jerusalem. That is the temple. What we have is a miniature version of that, but it's not the temple. And so therefore we don't call it a temple. We call it a synagogue, or we say in Yiddish, we call it a shul, a Beit Knesset in Hebrew, a house of gathering for prayer. Shul is Yiddish. Shul is, I think, German, actually. It's a Yiddish word. It's a German, it's school. So how to become a shul prayer then? No, but it's not a school. It's a so I guess there was a shul because people. Okay, so people used to study in the shul. People didn't study in the yeshiva. Correct. So I guess that's there. You go. That's why it's called a shul. It's a Yiddish word anyway. I'm sure there's a Ladino word for it. I'm sure there's a whatever place to pray, right? What? Now I didn't copy the next piece of the Gemara, but then another opinion says Shalom from Texas. So anyway, so the Gemara says also that this is the Beis Rabbeinu Shabbat. I should have kept it in there. That it's the house of gathering for with the yeshiva, with the head. I should have put it in. I took it out. The next opinion of the Gemara says that the Mikdash Ma'at of God is the house of the teachers, where not all the teachers, but the leader of the generations. It's like 770, the place where the Rebbe would live. So in that time, in the times of the temple, the time of the Gemara was the house of Rebbe, I think. That's the house, Beis Rabbeinu, the house of Rebbe in Babylonia. That's our Mikdash, that's our miniature sanctuary.
It's a shul.
770 is a shul, but more than just being a shul, it's a house from which Torah spreads out to the entire generation. I took it out, but now I'm thinking I should have left it in. Okay, anyway. So we have this idea over here that God says to us, it's true the temple is being destroyed, it's true we're suffering a loss, but don't worry, there's still a small mikdash. It's not the mikdash, it's not the temple, it's a miniature version, but this miniature version is going to be a place where you can still have, number one, that feeling of connection to God, a place where you can walk in and feel a sense of spiritual bonding, a spiritual closeness, that I'm close to God, and a place by which you can inspire the nations, a place of pride, a place of beauty, a place where the Jews can gather, a place of national identity, because a shul is not only a place where we come to pray, a shul is a place of community, a place of gathering, a place of connecting, a place where we become a community that can give light to the nations. Okay? So someone's writing, when the state and people are destroyed, that alone is a reason to mourn forever, because we are in a forever position to lose everything. We need to realize our political leadership cannot be trusted. It was challenge them to pay. Okay. Mordei, I say to you that God is in charge. Okay. Now, that's level number one. On the deeper level, besides for the fact that we have a Beis HaMikdash in every single synagogue, in every single shul, in every single place where Jews gather together to learn and to pray, that becomes a home for God. On the deeper level, the Beis HaMikdash is not only in the shul. Where else can God be found? Our homes, everywhere. Where is God? Wherever you let him in, right? But we see there's another very famous verse. When God told Moshe to build the Mishkan, the first home, quote unquote, the first sanctuary for God, what did Hashem tell Moshe to do? He said in chapter 25 of Exodus, verse number 8, God says to Moshe, V'asuli mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'tocham, and I will dwell in them. So if you speak any good Hebrew or any good English for that matter, you know that the word sanctuary is singular and the word them is plural, many. So how does it say make for me a single sanctuary? It doesn't say make for me miktashot in the plural, make for me sanctuaries. It says sanctuary. Now dwell in them is plural. So the classic answer is that God's already saying that there'll be, besides for the Mishkan, the tabernacle that was built in the desert, there's also going to be the first Beit HaMikdash that we talked about, built by Shlomo HaMelech, that'll be destroyed by the Babylonians. There will be the second Beit HaMikdash, the second sanctuary, built by Ezra the scribe and renovated by King Herod, that'll be destroyed by the Romans. And one day there'll be a third Beit HaMikdash built by Mashiach or built by God that will never be destroyed. That's the classic answer. But there's a very, very famous answer. It says, what does it mean you should make in them a mikdash? God's saying you should make for me a mikdash b'toch kol echad ve'echad. Inside every single person can be a home for God. Inside every home can be a home for God, but inside ourselves. Meaning, the temple is not just a place that existed 2,000 years ago. And 2,000 years ago, we had a Beit HaMikdash. 2,000 years ago, we had a place where all the Jews gathered together to pray and to see the glory of God and to be a light to the nations. And now we lost it. Every single Jew, first of all, has their own mikdash, their own community, their own synagogue, their own communal place of bringing the glory of God. But in addition, each and every single one of us on our own, within ourselves, we can find the ability to spiritually connect to God, and we can find the ability to be a light of God unto the nations. And that's a very beautiful idea. It's a very beautiful idea. And this is the first aspect of the answer I want to share. Why are we mourning? Oh, actually, I'm jumping ahead. So we have these two ideas. That there's a mikdash ma'at. Yechezkel tells us a small mikdash, a miniature temple. It's not the full one. But right here in the room in which we are in, when we gather in this place and we beautify this place, not only physically, spiritually, make it a beautiful place, it becomes a God-centered place, a God-focused place. And the moment you walk into this room, you know you're in the place of God. And because you know you're in the place of God, you're able to feel a little bit of sense of God. And because you can feel a little sense of God, you can feel a spiritual connection. Your prayer in this room has more of a connection to Hashem than the prayer in your own home because you're in the place of God. But even if you're not in the synagogue, even if you're in your home, and even if you're in a business trip and you're in a hotel and you're traveling or wherever you are, and you're not in even a mikdash ma'at, in a small miniature sanctuary, a small miniature temple of God, it's still not gone. We can still make for ourselves, within ourselves, a home for God, a sanctuary for God. That's the temple to me. Okay. So, was the temple really destroyed? Based on what I just said so now. Was the temple really destroyed? It was disseminated, very good. It was sprinkled out. It was into little pieces and disseminated all over the world. So, I mean, obviously the temple was destroyed. It's a mikdash ma'at. What does ma'at mean? Miniature. It's a small miniature version. It's not the real deal. It's a very small piece of it, but there's still some holiness. I want to present something much, much more powerful now. Why is it that we're still mourning? Why is it we're still mourning? There's a rule in the world, in life, that God invented. When God invented, it's not the right word. When God made the world, God designed and put into the nature of the universe a reality that when someone dies or something happens, over time we forget. It's human nature, and God designed it this way on purpose. If we could not forget pain, we could never heal. We can never move on in life. So God, yes, sadly, we all have to go through moments where we experience pain. But we also are given the gift of being able to forget the pain we've experienced. We can't spend our lives living in pain. It's just, you can't live life that way. You'll just die from the pain if you don't ever get out of the pain. Imagine, on a very simple level, imagine if you stubbed your toe, whatever, you were dancing, you're playing sports, and you fell and you hurt yourself. You tripped and you scraped your knee. Imagine if you could never forget that pain. You never play ever again. Right? If one time you banged having a baby. If you couldn't forget the pain of having a baby, you never have a baby again. If you hit your finger one time, I don't know, knocking a nail into something, and you carry that pain with you forever, you have trauma. On a much deeper level, when we experience loss, when we experience tragedy, when someone dies, God forbid, we talked about the mourning before of a person that, God forbid, loses a relative. So you go through a period of sadness, and the Torah says to be sad and to allow yourself to experience the grief, not to hide it, not to repress it. You're allowed to feel pain. But then God says, a kindness I'm going to do, that I'm going to allow you to forget the pain. I'm going to allow you to heal, to find new happiness in your life, to find new love in your life, to find new meaning in your life, and not to stay stuck in pain forever. There's one exception. What's the exception? Well, the Beis HaMikdash. We'll get back to the Beis HaMikdash. What's the other exception? Hello from Brazil. What's the other exception? When the person is not able to heal and move on from the pain of a loss? Even a child, it's much harder to heal. You don't ever heal from losing a child. That's true. But still you can move on in life. When the person has not passed away. I want to read to you a fascinating verse in chapter 37. You all know the story of Yaakov. When Yaakov Avinu, when Joseph was sold as a slave by his brothers, right? Remember the story? Joseph is sold as a slave by his brothers. And then the brothers take his beautiful coat, they tear it, they dip it in the blood of a goat, and they come back to their father, say, Daddy, Daddy, we saw this on the road. Do you recognize it? And he says, my son has been devoured by a wild animal. And then the Torah tells us the following verse, a very, very sad verse, a painful verse. Genesis chapter 37, verse 35. And all of Jacob's sons and all his daughters, they arose to console him. But he refused to be consoled, for he said, because I will descend on the count of my son as a mourner to the grave. And his father wept for him. Rashi tells us, why did he refuse to be mourned, to be consoled? Says Rashi, he refused to be consoled because no one accepts consolation for a person who is really alive but believed to be dead. For it is decreed that a dead person should be forgotten from the heart, but not a living person. You hear the beauty of this? When someone is still alive, you can't forget them. When someone is still alive, you can't let go. You can only let go of a person when they've died. As long as they haven't died, you can't forget them. So why are we mourning the Beis HaMikdash 2,000 years later? Because the Beis HaMikdash wasn't destroyed. The temple still stands. Not in this glorious version of what it was 2,000 years ago. Not in all of its glory, in all of its splendor, in all of its magnificence. But there's a Mikdash Ma'at that we have. And we carry that. We hold on to that. The Jewish people have been in exile for 2,000 years, and we've never forgotten the Beit HaMikdash because we've never let go of it. We've never not had synagogues that have anchored us to our, that have anchored us to God, that have anchored us to Torah. We've never not had the ability to find within ourselves how to connect to God. And so as long as we are holding on to a shul, we're holding on to our synagogue, we're holding on to our community, and we're saying, I'm part of a Mikdash. Yes, the one in Jerusalem is gone. But guess what? We're mourning because what we lost is not gone. What we've lost still exists. We don't have it. Obviously, let me be clear. I'm not saying that what we have in this beautiful shul in any way is similar to the temple. We've mourned the temple. We're missing the temple. This is a very, very poor substitute, even though it's a beautiful, beautiful building. Baruch Hashem. Thank you to all of you to help make it beautiful. But despite how beautiful the shul is, it's nothing compared to the temple. And I don't only mean in physical beauty. In spiritual beauty, it's nothing compared to the Beis HaMikdash. So it's like Yaakov, whose son is missing. Jacob's son, as far as he can tell, is dead. He can't see him. He can't talk to him. He can't experience him. But he also can't forget him because his son is still alive. So we can't forget the Beis HaMikdash because it's still alive. It's still with us. It's still connected to us. It's something that we took with us into exile. If the Beis HaMikdash was only a physical building in a geographical location, then yes, when we were exiled from Israel, the temple or the remains of the destruction remained over there in Jerusalem. And here in Florida, what do we have? Nothing. Thank you. But if we understand when we left Israel, we took God with us into exile. God came with us. And so the temple, in a different iteration, in a different form, came with us into exile. So we don't have the temple in its beauty. We don't have Mashiach. We don't have redemption. We're living in exile. So we're mourning. We're sad. We're crying. But you know what the fact that we're crying means? That the temple is still alive. Just in our hearts, in our shuls. And because we keep it alive, that's what we're going to bring it back to Israel. Now, I want to go back to that idea soon, but first I want to tell you another beautiful idea. It's very much connected. I've been explaining to you on a spiritual level how the temple is very much alive. Let's be grateful for what we have, and what we have is beautiful. I've been explaining to you how the Beis HaMikdash is alive in a spiritual way. So what I've said is very beautiful, like on the metaphorical sense. Meaning, if you're listening to this class, you can say, what the rabbi is saying is nice, like in a nice spiritual way. I mean, the temple is destroyed. What he's saying is not true literally. Literally, the temple is gone, but we have some kind of memory, nostalgia or something. So I want to show you a halacha from the Rambam, a law that describes when the Rambam is writing the laws of the Beis HaMikdash, The Rambam writes in detail how Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, when he built the temple, he put tunnels into the temple. Actually, I meant to put a copy of this too, but I didn't, unfortunately, whatever. But Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, he built the temple. He knew, writes the Rambam, that one day that temple will be destroyed. And because the temple will be destroyed one day, what did Shlomo HaMelech, what did King Solomon do? He made tunnels underground under the Temple Mount, where one day the ark could be hidden. And many, many years later, before the Babylonians came and destroyed the temple, Yoshiyahu, who was the king at the time, took the Aron, the holy ark, and the bread, the man from heaven that was in the ark, and the tablets that God gave us, and the kruvim, and the stick of Moshe, and the other things. There were 5 things. Oh, the Urim v'Tumim, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol that communicated with God. 5 things, and they were hidden in the tunnels. They were hidden under the Temple Mount somewhere. When the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, they took the menorah, they took the wash basin, they took other things, but the Aron, the ark, was buried underground. It was not taken. In the second temple, no one knew where it was. In the second temple, what do we have? Instead of the Aron in the Holy of Holies, there was a rock that was in the place of we call the Evan Hashasiyah. There was a rock that was in the place where the temple, where the ark stood. So the Rebbe explains something very, very fascinating. Why is the Rambam writing as a halacha in Jewish law the fact that when Shlomo HaMelech built the temple, he built an underground passage where one day there'd be a secret chamber where they could bury and hide the Aron? Why is that relevant in Jewish law? To know the laws of the size and dimensions of how the temple was built and how big the ark was and how big the building was. Why is it relevant to know when you're learning the laws of how the temple was built, to know that there was a secret chamber buried underground? And the whole story, the whole history, how Yoshiyahu took it, and he was the one that buried it there. So the Rebbe explains something very fascinating. It's a whole talk, but I wanted to just bring it up because it fits into this idea beautifully. What was the ultimate epitome of the temple? What was the holiest space of the temple? The ark. The Aron Kodesh, the holy ark, and the Holy of Holies. The ultimate definition of temple is the place where God revealed himself. Where did God reveal himself? Through the kruvim, through the wings of the cherubs, on top of the ark. So when Shlomo HaMelech built the temple, he built the temple to last for all of time. He built the temple to have 2 rooms for the Aron Kodesh. One room would be above ground, where we could see it, and one room would be below ground. But it was part of the initial construction. It wasn't that later on the Babylonians are coming. What are we going to do? We're going to destroy the temple. Let's go find a hiding place. The place where the ark is currently resting right now, it's part of the initial construction and initial design of the initial plan for where the Beis HaMikdash would be. So the temple, most of it was destroyed. But one room of it, a room underground, a room that has the holiest part of the Beit HaMikdash, is still standing.
So was it upstairs at some time and then it was moved downstairs? Or was
What, the ark? No, the ark was upstairs. Well, upstairs, I would have called it. It was in the in the temple on Temple Mount for a few hundred years. Before the Babylonians came, when King Yoshiyahu saw that already the wars were coming and all that. So before the land was invaded, before they destroyed the temple, he hid the ark in the underground tunnel.
And the Babylonians didn't know that there was this underground?
They didn't realize. I don't know if they knew. They didn't know. I'm saying they saw some other gold and silver in the temple. They were pretty happy. They didn't know that they were missing one. They're missing one piece of furniture. So this is an amazing idea. What I'm saying on the metaphorical, spiritual level is true on the halacha level too. On a reveal in halacha, on the Rambam, in Maimonides, by the Rambam telling us the structure of the temple, how the temple was built to begin with. Initially, it was designed to have a room for the Aron Kodesh to be. From that proves that the entirety of the temple was never destroyed. The entirety of the temple is still standing. There's a part of the temple still standing. And which part? the part of the most holy part, the holiest part, the Aron, the Ark, with the tablets inside, is still standing. So the temple still stands on some level. The temple is still standing in Jerusalem. And on a spiritual level, the temple is still standing right here in the building which we're in. This room is a temple. And we can all carry a temple within ourselves. So we're mourning because the temple wasn't lost. Every single nation suffers calamities. Even the Jewish people suffered other calamities. The expulsion from Spain, wherever, the burnings of the Talmud, and their sad days. And we remember those days. But at the end of the day, those days came and they went. It's history. But the temple being destroyed is something that's still relevant in our lives, and therefore we mourn it all the time. So now I want to tell you this idea. The Chassam Sofer writes as follows. He writes that Tisha B'Av, it's not in the text, I'm just telling you what he writes. He writes that Tisha B'Av is called a holiday. Chassam Sofer was a Moshe Pressburg from Pressburg, Germany. He was a very, very big scholar, Rosh Yeshiva. He lived about 200 years ago. He was the teacher of the Rosh Yeshiva in Pressburg, Germany. He writes as follows. Tisha B'Av is called a holiday. It's a holiday. We're not allowed to work on the holiday. We're not allowed to work when you're mourning. We're not allowed to work. We don't say tachton. We don't say the confessional prayers. Right? The confession that we say in a day. Even though Tisha B'Av is a day of sadness, we don't say the prayers of confession on Tisha B'Av. And in fact, in halacha, in Jewish law, in the Gemara, Tisha B'Av is called a moed. It's called a holiday. Now, the simple explanation why is Tisha B'Av a holiday? Tisha B'Av is the saddest day on the calendar. The reason why it's a holiday is because it's the day that will be our greatest celebration, because it's the day that Mashiach was born. The Gemara tells us a very, very interesting, very fascinating story. Very briefly, that there was a Jew that was walking, and the Arab was plowing with his field with a cow, and the cow began to move very, very loudly. And the Arab said to the Jew, "Take off your." No, the Arab was walking by, and the Jew was plowing. He said to him, "Take off the what's it called, the plow from the ox. Take off the harness, because your temple was destroyed. You should sit in mourning. Don't work." And then the cow made another very, very loud moo or a loud noise. He said, "You can put back on the harness, because Neilad Mashiach Shloshel, the savior of the Jewish people, is now born. The birthday of Mashiach is today." Anyway, he became very curious now who was Mashiach that was born. So it says also he went to the town square, and he listened to the conversations, and he heard a woman coming to shop by when mothers were shopping for the kids. And another woman says, "Mother of Menachem, where's your child? Why are you buying stuff for your child?" So she said, "If I could, I would strangle him. He was born at the worst time." So he became very curious. He asked her, what do you mean? So he was born right when the temple was destroyed. Child born at the time of destruction is a bad omen. It's not going to be it's not going to be good, this child. So he says to her, "You buy this kid anything you need. I'll pay for it. I'm going out of town. I come back and I'm going to pay for everything. I want to see your child." Pays for everything. A few weeks later, he comes back. He goes to this woman, "Where's your child?" When I came home, a big wind came and blew my child away, and he disappeared. Big wind came, like a volcano came, whatever, and it blew my child away. I guess because he said that this was Mashiach, was born, the savior of the Jewish people. So the child was taken away. But anyways, this story in the Gemara. Tisha B'Av is the birthday of Mashiach. So it's a Mayid, it's a holiday, because it's the day that will become our celebration of the rebuilding of the third temple. So Chassam Sofer says a beautiful insight. It's as follows. Why is it a holiday? We don't bring any offerings on this day. There's no carbon, there's no celebration, there's no special prayer. Pesach has offerings, has special prayers. Every holiday has something to bring to the holiday, right? What are we bringing on Tisha B'Av? Nothing. In fact, we're sad, we're mourning. Says Chassam Sofer, the fact that the people, 2,000 years later, have still refused to accept consolation and to be consoled for the fact that our temple is lost, you know what that means? That means that one day we will be able to once again celebrate together with our temple, together with Mashiach. So Tisha B'Av is already called a holiday now because, as I just explained about the idea that we don't ever accept the loss of a person who's still alive, as I just explained a minute ago, it's from the Chassam Sofer, that since we're still mourning someone that's alive, the fact that we're mourning proves that we're connected and that the Mashiach and the temple is still alive within us. And therefore, it's a holiday. Because we know that very, very soon, as we say in the Eicha Hashiveinu, Hashem Elecha v'Neshuva, that God will return us back to the way it used to be back in the beginning of time. Understand? There's a very famous story. Whether it's true or not true is a big debate amongst historians. But the story goes that Napoleon Bonaparte, when he was conquering Russia and all that, in the Jewish lands, he once came into a Jewish area on Tisha B'Av. And he comes to the Jewish neighborhood, and Napoleon was very curious to know a lot about the people that were under him. This is for sure. He was very curious. He was an intellectual person. And Napoleon comes into the shul. He sees everyone sitting on the floor. Everyone's sitting and crying, and they're mourning, and they're weeping and wailing. He says, "What's going on? What are they so sad about?" So they tell him, his advisors tell him, they're crying because their temple was destroyed. Okay, the temple was destroyed. Big deal. I'm Napoleon. He wants to make everyone happy. He wants to make all of his subjects happy. I'm going to build them a new temple. Tell me, where was the temple destroyed? I'll fix it. I'll build a new one. So then, the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was in his territory. When was it destroyed? 1,500 years ago, 1,700 years ago. How many years ago it was then? 1,700 years ago. And Napoleon was, what? They're sitting here in Russia or Poland, whichever, France. They're sitting here in France on the floor, mourning a temple that was destroyed in a different country, in Jerusalem, 1,700 years ago. Napoleon said, officially, that's how the story goes, a nation that still mourns its temple after 1,700 years is a nation that will merit to see its temple be rebuilt. And by the way, those words of Napoleon are words of the Gemara. The Gemara says there's also a prophecy that says that Kol Hamas Avel, it says in the Gemara, Simchu Yerushalayim, the Gilaba Kol Ha'eleh, you should rejoice, Yerushalayim, and rejoice all of those that love you, etc. Says the Gemara that whoever Kol Hamas Avel al Yerushalayim, whoever mourns for Yerushalayim, Zoyche v'roeh b'simchasa, they will merit and they will see the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And whoever does not mourn on Yerushalayim will not be able to rejoice and to see the simcha, the joy, the celebration of the return back to Jerusalem. So it's on a simple level. But on what we explained tonight, it makes perfect sense. If you mourn Jerusalem, if you sit on the floor Wednesday night and you feel the loss, and you feel the pain, and you feel the suffering of exile, and you feel like we have something beautiful that was taken away from us, not 2,000 years ago, you can realize that we are missing something. You know what that means? That you're going to merit to rejoice with the rebuilding of the temple because you are still connected to it. The fact that you're mourning means you know that it's still alive. The fact that you're mourning means that you know that it's a part of you. And as long as it's a part of you, as long as you sit in mourning in Jerusalem and you sit and you recognize, I'm crying because there's something that belonged to me that I don't have, but that's still alive, we will merit, God willing, very, very soon, even before this year Wednesday. Just by talking about how we'll be sad on Wednesday and how we'll fast and be sad on Thursday, that alone will be enough that God willing this year, instead of sitting on the floor Wednesday night, we'll be sitting in Yerushalayim, sitting at the feet of Mashiach, learning Torah, celebrating, that we'll see the rejoicing of Yerushalayim, God willing, very, very soon. Okay, good night, my friends.